the American West. A lawless frontier where men could shed their past like a snake sheds its skin, where a farmer could become a gunslinger, where a preacher's son could become a killer, where your name mattered less than your aim. For over a century, we've immortalized these outlaws in film, folklore, and legend. We know their crimes, we know their deaths, but we never knew their blood until now. Welcome to Famous Roots, where we conduct what we call DNA audits on history's most infamous figures. Because while these legends lived on the edge of society, their genetic code tells a different story, one of survival, migration, and hidden heritage that contradicts everything we thought we knew about the Wild West's most wanted. Today, we're opening the files on 6 outlaws whose DNA reveals secrets more shocking than any bank robbery or shootout. And I promise you, the final case will change how you see the entire mythology of the American frontier. If you're fascinated by the hidden genealogies of American icons, subscribe to Famous Roots right now. We publish deep-dive DNA investigations every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. And hit that bell so you're notified when we reveal our next genetic mystery. Black Bart. Between 1875 and 1883, a lone figure terrorized Wells Fargo stagecoaches across Northern California. 28 robberies, not a single shot fired. And at the scene of his crimes, he left behind something no other outlaw ever did: poetry. The verses were refined, educated, utterly out of place in the brutal West. When lawmen finally captured him in 1883, they discovered the truth. Black Bart was Charles Earl Bowles, a decorated Union Civil War veteran. But our DNA audit revealed something even more telling. Charles Bowles wasn't some rough American frontiersman who'd learned to write. He was 100% English, traced directly to Norfolk, in the east of England. Birth records show he immigrated to New York as a child in the 1830s, but his genetic markers tell the story of a refined lineage, far removed from the dusty trails he'd later haunt. The gentleman bandit wasn't just a nickname, it was in his blood. Black Bart was England, dressed in American dust. Belle Starr. She wore velvet and carried a pearl-handled pistol. Belle Starr, the bandit queen of the Oklahoma Territory. Newspapers painted her as the female Jesse James, a woman who rode with outlaws, married criminals, and died violently in 1889, shot in the back on her own property. But that legend? It was almost entirely fabricated by dime novels and sensational press. The DNA audit tells a radically different story. Belle was born Myra Maybelle Shirley in 1848 in Carthage, Missouri. But her family didn't come from poverty or lawlessness. Our genealogical mapping shows she descended from wealthy Virginia planters, landowners with significant social standing. Her father, John Shirley, ran a prosperous inn and owned slaves before the Civil War. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Genetic analysis reveals that Belle Starr had a direct familial connection to the Hatfield family. Yes, those Hatfields, of the infamous Hatfield-McCoy feud. Her maternal grandmother's line traces back to the same Appalachian roots that produced one of America's bloodiest family feuds. Belle wasn't a self-made outlaw queen. She was the product of Southern aristocracy in collapse, Civil War displacement, and deep-rooted Appalachian feuding culture. Her so-called bandit life was less about crime and more about survival in a world where her family's status had been obliterated. The bandit queen was never really a bandit at all. She was a displaced plantation daughter, clinging to dignity in a world that no longer recognized her bloodline. Wyatt Earp. The name itself is synonymous with frontier justice, the gunfight at the OK Corral, the iron-willed lawman who brought order to Tombstone, Arizona, the very symbol of right versus wrong in the Wild West. But when genealogists began mapping the Earp family tree, they uncovered something profoundly disturbing, a genetic link that turned the legend of Wyatt Earp into a haunting contradiction. The Earp family line traces back, through multiple generations, to the Harp brothers, Makaja, Big Harp, and Wiley, Little Harp, America's first recorded serial killers. Operating along the Wilderness Road in the 1790s, these men didn't just rob travelers. They mutilated them, disemboweled them, killed for pleasure, not profit. Now, to be clear, Wyatt Earp lived nearly a century after the Harps, and there's no evidence he knew of this connection. But genealogical DNA mapping doesn't lie. The same bloodline that produced two of the most sadistic killers in American history also produced the most famous lawman of the frontier. Justice versus genetic history. Law versus legacy. Wyatt Earp spent his life hunting outlaws, never knowing that the very violence he fought against ran through his own veins. It's a reminder that the West wasn't just about choosing sides. Sometimes, both sides were written into your DNA. A Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the most romanticized outlaws in American history, and according to legend, they died in a hail of bullets in San Vicente, Bolivia, in 1908, surrounded by the Bolivian army, going down in a blaze of glory. Except, did they? For decades, rumors swirled that Butch Cassidy, real name Robert Leroy Parker, had actually survived Bolivia and returned to the United States under the alias William T. Phillips, living quietly in Spokane, Washington, until 1937. In 1991, forensic scientists exhumed remains from the Bolivian grave believed to hold Cassidy and Sundance. They extracted DNA samples and compared them to the Parker family line, Butch's verified relatives in Utah. The results? No match. The bones in Bolivia weren't Butch Cassidy, which means one of two things. Either Butch was never buried there, or the grave that was exhumed wasn't his. Either way, the genetic evidence suggests that Butch Cassidy likely did make it home. Family members of William T. Phillips have long insisted he was actually Butch, pointing to his intimate knowledge of outlaw operations and his physical resemblance. While definitive proof remains elusive, Phillips was cremated. The DNA audit tells us this much. The Hollywood ending in Bolivia was fiction. Butch Cassidy may have lived out his final years not as a legend, but as a lie. An old man in Washington, carrying the secret of his survival to the grave. Billy the Kid, shot dead by Sheriff Pat Garrett in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, in 1881. Age 21. Case closed. Or was it? In 1950, an elderly man named Brushy Bill Roberts came forward, claiming he was the real Billy the Kid, that Garrett had shot the wrong man, and Billy had been living under an assumed identity for nearly 70 years. He petitioned the governor of New Mexico for a pardon, citing detailed knowledge of events only Billy could have known. Most historians dismissed him as a fraud, but some details were troubling. The problem with proving or disproving Brushy Bill's claim comes down to DNA. And this is where the case becomes genuinely heartbreaking. To confirm Billy's identity, geneticists need mitochondrial DNA, passed down through the maternal line. That means finding the remains of Billy's mother, Catherine Antrim. But Catherine's grave, somewhere in Silver City, New Mexico, was never marked. It's lost. Without her DNA, we can't definitively match Billy the Kid's remains in Fort Sumner, or rule out Brushy Bill Roberts. What we do know from genealogical records is that Billy was of Irish descent, born Henry McCarty in New York City's Irish immigrant slums in 1859. The Brushy Bill mystery remains exactly that, a mystery. DNA could solve it. But the key to unlocking Billy the Kid's true identity lies 6 feet under an unmarked New Mexico grave that may never be found. Some secrets, it seems, the West is determined to keep. And now, the case that changed everything. Jesse James, the most infamous outlaw in American history, bank robber, train robber, Confederate guerrilla, a man whose name became synonymous with rebellion and violence. On April 3, 1882, he was shot in the back of the head by Robert Ford in St. Joseph, Missouri. Or so the story goes. But for over a century, rumors persisted. Conspiracy theories claimed Jesse had faked his death, that another man was buried in his grave, and that Jesse James lived into old age under an assumed name. In 1995, those rumors forced the state of Missouri to do the unthinkable. They exhumed Jesse James. Forensic teams extracted DNA from the remains and compared it to mitochondrial DNA from living descendants of Jesse's sister, Susan James. Mitochondrial DNA passes unchanged from mother to child, generation after generation, an unbroken genetic thread. The results were definitive. The man buried in Kearney, Missouri was absolutely, conclusively Jesse Woodson James. The conspiracy theories died that day. But here's what nobody expected. The DNA audit revealed that Jesse James, the quintessential American outlaw, the rebel, the populist hero who robbed from the rich, descended from prestigious English aristocracy. His lineage traces back to high-status families in Somerset and Kent, with connections to landed gentry and even minor nobility. Jesse James wasn't the son of struggling frontier farmers fighting against Eastern elites. He was the Eastern elite, genetically speaking. His blood carried the same aristocratic markers as the bankers and railroad barons he claimed to fight against. The irony is almost poetic. The man who became a symbol of rebellion against the establishment was the establishment, written into his very DNA. The Wild West was a place where you could reinvent yourself, where a Norfolk gentleman could become a poet bandit, where a plantation daughter could become a queen, where a lawman could carry the blood of killers, and an outlaw could carry the blood of kings. But DNA doesn't care about legends. It doesn't care about the stories we tell ourselves or the myths we build. It simply tells the truth about who we were, where we came from, and what runs through our veins, whether we know it or not. If you found these revelations as fascinating as we did, subscribe to Famous Roots for more DNA audits on history's most legendary figures. We're just getting started. And trust me, the genetic secrets we're uncovering next will shock you even more. Thanks for watching. And remember, the past may be written in history books, but the truth is written in blood.